This is, pretty important stuff, actually. First off, the emergency abortions in Idaho, and I'm going to get to that when I rant about, the Supreme Court and how, it was never intended that they should be kings and queens of America. But bottom line, what the Supreme Court did in this case, well, here's what the case was. Idaho has a ban on abortions that also bans emergency room abortions to save a woman's life, essentially. And unless she's like just right on the edge of death, I get that's about as close as you can get. And even then, generally speaking, they're not practicing that. They're not doing those kinds of abortions in Idaho. So there is this federal law which supersedes state law under the Constitution. I mean, the Constitution explicitly says the federal law is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution and federal law under it are basically overrule state and local laws. Period, full stop. But the and so, in Moyle versus the United States, the case was, can Idaho's law basically illegally overrule federal law? And the conservative courts, the Trump appointee judges had ruled that, yeah, this is about abortion. That, it doesn't matter what the federal law is. Idaho can overrule it. And so it went to the Supreme Court. But the last court that ruled, the appeals court, said that no, federal law trumps state law. And so that's the current status of it right now. And the Supreme Court said, we want to hear this case. 4 of us said we wanted to hear this case this year. But when we heard the arguments and we realized that this is going to be, basically be an explosive case about making abortion even more illegal in Idaho, we just decided that we'd really rather not decide this case this year because it might piss people off and cause them to vote for Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump. This is the exact same. In other words, they said we're not going to make a decision on this case. We're just going to kick it down to the lower court. They said it was improvidentially granted, the cert, certiorari, the right to argue before the Supreme Court. They did the same thing with the mifepristone case. You got 4 right-wing, no doubt Catholic judges who were, who want to impose their religion on the rest of us here in the United States. And, they said, yes, we'll take this case. In fact, presumably the same 4 took both cases, the mifepristone case and the Idaho abortion case. Mifepristone, of course, the abortion drug that accounts for more than half of all abortions in the United States, and is being used via telemedicine even by women in states that have outlawed abortion. So, in both cases, basically what the court ruled, or what the conservatives in the court ruled, was we're going to put this off till next year, because now they don't explain why. But, it's obvious to me, and I think obvious to anybody who has half a brain, that the reason that they postponed these decisions, very straightforward, the reason that they postponed these decisions was because, they don't want to upset people. They're perfectly willing to do it in a non-election year, but this is a presidential election year, and, they just don't want to add fire to the fuel of all the women in America and their friends and allies and husbands and brothers and fathers and sons who are pissed off about Dobbs. They just don't want to add fire to that fuel, or fuel to that fire, excuse me, number one. Number 2, they rejected the liability shield that was at the center of the Purdue Pharma scandal. Purdue Pharma was started by this family, the Sacklers, who are one of the richest families in America. They're worth billions and billions of dollars. And they made their money selling OxyContin, basically. Or they made most of their money selling OxyContin. And they sold it, assuring doctors and hospitals that this is, finally, we've got an opioid that doesn't cause addiction. And so, it just got widely prescribed all over the country. There was a period of about 5 years there where, you could get Oxy, you could just walk into a doctor's office and say, my back hurts. Oh, have some OxyContin. And that led to millions of Americans getting addicted and hundreds of thousands of Americans dying from their addictions. And the Sacklers apparently knew all along how deadly their drug was. But this family, this criminal family, just decided, hey, we don't care how many people die. We're going to make billions of dollars. And they did. So they cut a deal where their company, Purdue Pharma, would declare bankruptcy. It would give billions, a couple of $1 billion to the victims. And part of that deal was that nobody in the family can ever be prosecuted. Well, the Supreme Court blew that up at a 5-4 decision. Interestingly, Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, Amy Coney Barrett, and Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented. They wanted the deal to go through. But all the other judges, all the other justices, Gorsuch wrote the decision, said, yeah, let's do it. So, oh, excuse me. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Gorsuch was joined. These were the judges that said, yes, yes, blow up the deal. It was Gorsuch, Thomas, Alito, Barrett, and Jackson, which is fascinating. It's fascinating. Another decision that they came down with this morning was to block President Biden's air pollution plan. This was a program that was put together by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Biden administration. The problem is you've got, I mean, what happens if you live in, Pennsylvania, and which is downwind from Ohio, and Ohio has a bunch of factories that are pumping poison into the air, particularly if they're located in eastern Ohio, because the prevailing winds go from west to east. And so most of that pollution is not going into Ohio, it's going into Pennsylvania. Well, what can Pennsylvania do about that? Nothing, right? So they worked out this deal that says that, downwind states can actually sue and have some power to prevent themselves from having pollution dumped on them. And this was challenged by Ohio, Indiana, and West Virginia, along with energy companies and trade groups. In other words, the polluters said, wait a minute, we don't like this. And the Supreme Court, this was another 5-4 decision. Amy Coney Barrett joined the 3 liberals on this one, which is weird because her father was in the oil industry forever, and she's generally very favorable to the oil industry. Her father was a lawyer for Chevron, as I recall, and for some 30 or 40 years. And but anyhow, that was the decision. They decided on behalf of the polluters. Surprise, surprise, right? And finally, the Securities and Exchange Commission and 200 other federal agencies routinely enforce their judgments against companies and individuals who have violated their rules with fines. Right, like the IRS. If you don't pay your taxes, you get hit with a fine. The EPA, if you pollute, you can get hit with a fine. Well, in this case, it was the Securities and Exchange Commission, and if you engage in securities fraud, you get hit with a fine. Well, what the Supreme Court said, and this is absolutely bizarre, it's a 6-3 ruling. All the conservatives lined up on one side. They said agencies can't impose fines. You have to have jury trials. Now, there's over 200 agencies that impose fines. What's going to follow now is people saying, hey, I don't have to pay fines to the IRS. I don't have to pay my parking fines. I deserve a jury trial, etc. I mean, this, again, these people are just, they're completely off the wall, these right-wingers. So where did they get this power? Where did the Supreme Court get the authority to overrule Congress, to overrule the president, to overrule the administration? Who put them in charge of America? If you don't know the story I'm about to share with you, it'll probably shock you, but I'll tell you on the other side of this break. Stay tuned.